Hello, welcome to Unit 402 for the Level 4 Health and Social Care course. This is Part 1, Communicating in Health and Social Care. For this part, we've got two objectives that we'll be focusing on today. Two of the criteria from your assignment. We're looking at 1.1, compare and contrast two theoretical approaches to communication in health and social care, and 1.2, describe the main types of communication utilised within health and social care practice. In this part, we're going to be looking at three communication theories. You only need to write about two, but I've given you three because they'll be useful for you, and also it gives you a little bit of choice, so you can pick two out of the three to write about. We're going to be talking about the communication cycle. We're going to be talking about stages of group interaction. And we're going to be talking about something called SOLER. This is an acronym, S-O-L-E-R, and we're going to hear more about that in a little bit. So first, we're starting with the communication cycle. We addressed this a little bit in the Level 3 course. So those of you who have been on the Level 3, hopefully you might remember a little bit of it. This is by Michael Argyle. In 1972, he developed it. He's written many books and he's updated it. So I think he's on about the 5th or 6th edition of the book. If you go looking for it, I think the last one was in the 90s, but he hasn't changed it that much. He's just sort of added to it and embellished it. So the communication cycle is about acknowledging the fact that good communication is always a two-way process. And the important thing Argyle felt was that people need to actually understand the viewpoint of the other person to make sure the information gets across. He said it was a skill and you could learn it in the same way that you're learning to drive a car, really. So he was sort of drawing your attention to the fact that, you know, when you drive a car, you don't just drive straight and don't make any changes. You don't sort of hold your hands like that all the time. You have to move with the road, make little adjustments, make little changes. You have to change gear, you have to slow down, speed up. So there's always little adjustments. And Argyle was sort of comparing that to communicating, that when you're talking to people, you're always making little adjustments. If maybe they didn't quite understand that point, you might change the way you say it, or you might sort of add a bit of non-verbal communication to enhance it. So he talked about the communication cycle, which again, as I said, we looked at in Level 3, so this should be just a bit of a refresher, really. And the process of it. We're going to look at the process in a minute. But he did identify that verbal and non-verbal communication is not always straightforward in the decoding part of the process. It's a sort of code. It's a bit like Morse code, but hopefully a bit easier. But it has to be translated. Okay, so it's not relevant just to know the words. It's to understand the meaning behind the words as well. So you really have to work out what the person's saying as well. So if you have a look at it, this is the actual process as it goes through. Somebody has an idea. They want to tell somebody else about it. You code your message depending on who you're going to tell. So say you're telling one of your best friends, you'll put it into some sort of language that you know they understood, or the way that you normally speak to each other. You might back it up with some non-verbal communication. If you're talking to someone maybe who's deaf or hard of hearing, you might have to use sign language, or you might need to use some sort of visuals to help you, or someone who's got a bit of dementia. So you're going to change the way you talk depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to your boss, you'll use different language than if you're talking to your friend. So either way, you've passed on a message. The person receives the message, with all your added non-verbal and signs and signals, they hear it and then they decode it. Their brain decodes it and interprets it. And this is not always easy, especially if you don't know the person very well. You can make some assumptions about what their body language is all about. But obviously, if you're two friends who've known each other for years, you know a lot about what that person, when that person makes a certain face, what they mean, when they're holding themselves in a certain way, what it means. So it's a lot easier to understand an old friend than it is when you're talking to a service user who you've just met for the first time today. And that goes both ways as well. So hopefully with the right accompanying body language and signs and symbols, the person will understand, but it doesn't always happen the first time of meeting. You've both got to get used to each other. So thinking about it in care work, Argyle's emphasis on the cycle should make you as a staff member think about that cycle and think that how it's important to check out with the service user whether they've understood, not wait to the end of the conversation when you've told them loads and loads of stuff and maybe they didn't understand the first bit. So his research is quite useful, and it also reminds you of how important those non-verbal signals are, because they could be saying something different. So you need to be fairly self-aware about your own non-verbal communication. You could be saying something verbally, but your face could be telling them something else. So you need to be a bit conscious of that as well. Okay, so that was Argyle, the first theory we were looking at, and that focused very much on one-to-one conversation exchanges. I've given you Tuckman. His stages of group development comes from about 1965. And Tuckman's really is not focusing on that one-to-one communication. It's about how a group communicates and how they move together to communicate uniformly. So really, Tuckman was sort of was very much about group interaction. So you might really use these to reflect on how the staff team communicate, okay, and how the staff team develops together. But you could actually reflect on, if you've got a group of 20 service users who've been living in a home for a while, you could have a look, because they will have the same sort of communication development, group development as well, as a group of people who communicate. But very often it's used when we're discussing health and social care. It can be quite useful for looking at staff teams. And he said that there were 4 stages of group development. So it's forming, storming, norming, and performing. Okay, we're going to look at that a little bit more in a minute. So forming really focused on the team getting together, getting to know each other and establishing their ground rules. It's particularly important if it's a new development, like a new care home and a new recruitment of staff. You're basically strangers and you've got to spend that time getting to know each other. So you're a little bit tentative. People don't push their views out too much. They're a little bit careful. They're waiting to see how people react, and they're also waiting to get to know each other. So it's actually a difficult time to get a lot of things done when a team's forming, because they won't make decisions because they're not really sure what other people think of them. The second level is storming. So after this sort of tentative, we're all strangers, when people start getting a little bit more comfortable in their roles and they start to express their feelings and their views about things, but they're very much individuals. They haven't yet sort of gelled with the rest of the team. So some people might have very reactionary ideas, or different experiences that they're bringing in, which can be really valuable, but actually can be quite difficult to come to, especially if you're trying to put some policies together about the way the team's going to work. some people can have radically different ideas, can cause arguments, and also people are starting to assert themselves, and some of the leadership roles tend to come up, the strong people and the quiet people. The difficult thing is that during the storming time, the quieter members of the team often don't get to express their views because the other people are sort of more overbearing, really. And they can be a bit nervous about reacting, thinking someone will say they're stupid or just be unpleasant to them. So it's a funny time, really. And again, not a lot's getting done, and it's quite hard to get consensus at that time. The third stage is norming, where people start to feel part of the team, and they start thinking, okay, well, we've got to come to compromises to take this team forward. And they realize they can actually do these things. It's not offensive. It is the sort of thing that they can work with, and that work can be good if they start to accept other people's viewpoints. So this is hopefully where the team starts to develop some consensus, and doing that, the team can really, really move forward quite well. The final stage is performing, where the team has developed sort of good trust, good relationships, good open communication between each other, able to work flexibly with each other because they understand each other, and sort of, she's not very good in the morning, I'll do the evening because I'm much better at that, all those sorts of relationships. And hierarchy is not quite so important. It doesn't matter who's the star of the show. What it matters is the team delivers something good for the service users. And when they've got to that point, they're probably working at their best. Okay. And it can take some teams a short time to get to the performing stage. It can take some teams quite a long time to get to the performing stage. Those were the original 4, and then Tuckman added adjourning, which is really when they do an annual review. And nowadays, so many care homes are expected to create annual reviews. CQC expects you to write an annual report, talk about, your achievements and your successes, where things haven't gone as well as you'd like and where they have gone well. And obviously, if you're in some sort of contract with the local authority who are funding you, or the NHS, then the annual report goes to them as well to usually fulfill contractual obligations. So doing a review has become, some teams just did it because they thought it was good practice, but now they're almost expected to do it, really. And it's a good thing to do. It assesses a year. It gives you a chance to sort of take time out and stop and discuss, look back at the year and say, where did things go really well? Let's give ourselves a pat on the back for that. Where did things not go so well? What can we do to make it work better in future? And some members have really shone and have really sort of come up with some great ideas and done something good. It's a good time you can acknowledge those sort of things. This is when people might have their Employee of the Year awards and things like that, if they do that. So taking you through those stages, all teams tend to go through these stages, as I said. The problem is these progress can get disrupted when you get quite a lot of staff leave pretty much at the same time, or a whole load of new people join as well. So if the team expands or 2 teams merge, or 4 or 5, say you've got a staff team of 10 or 11 and 4 or 5 people leave, and then they do the recruitment, so you've got nearly half a new team, you could end up going back a couple of steps to the storming phase again. Okay, or maybe even the forming phase. So it's just something, the most important thing, it's really important for the staff to be aware of that, and most importantly for managers to be aware of that. So Tuckman's very, very useful for managers to reflect on what's going on, really, and sort of think, well, I know where we're going next, if maybe I can hurry it along a bit if I do this, this and this. Okay, so the third theory I want to look at is Egan, and he came up with the theory of solar. It's Gerard Egan, his book Skilled Helper, which is really focuses completely on body language, and it just reminds us that body language is just as important as the words we use when we communicate with service users. And again, for those of you who've done your level 3, when we talked about active listening, we knew how important that adding that body language to your active listening experience really enhances communication. So SOLA stands for S for sit squarely. So sit opposite someone. If someone's sitting down, sit down with them. Most important thing is to be at the same level. Never have a conversation about important things where staff members standing up and the service users sitting down. There's a very uneven level of power there. It's actually very intimidating, make the service user quite uncomfortable as well. So you need to be at the same level. You don't want to be dominant, okay? And you need to position your body so that there's enough of you facing the client so that you can seem attentive and open. Don't be so straight on and right close to them that you can be intimidating. We don't go knee to knee and looking straight into people's faces. This isn't a staring match, okay? It's more really of just sitting close enough. You can sit on angles, but it needs to be enough so that the person can see quite a lot of your top half of your body. Open posture, as opposed to having your arms folded and your knees together or your legs crossed at the same time, as opposed to sort of turning in on yourself, it's about turning out. So it's sitting fairly, upright, shoulders back, chest out so that people can see you. And it's sort of keeps it open and you're not appearing defensive. You're open to what people are saying. Lean forward, especially if someone's making a point. Show your interest. You have to be a bit careful. Leaning back in your chair like this, moving your head around, can show disinterest. You have to be a bit careful though not to lean forward so much that you invade their personal space. So you don't go right up into someone's face like this, but you lean forward. If you've got a coffee table to lean on, you can lean, show interest, with a bit of nodding and that. It's about moving your shoulders forward a little bit really, and you can move forward and back. People don't expect you to sit still all the time. E is for eye contact, and we know that's quite important to show your interest and attentive. If someone's eyes are wandering all over the place, then everyone knows that they're not interested. You have to be careful though. Eye contact, you do need to move your eyes away. A point if you sort of keep staring at someone and don't move your eyes or your head at all, that's quite intimidating really. It can feel quite aggressive. So the eye contact, you need to sort of hold the contact, maybe move away, hold the contact, move away. Just a reasonable amount, just to again show you're interested. And be careful about people's cultural backgrounds as well. Try to find out, develop your knowledge of different cultures. Some cultures don't like direct eye contact. Or it's a hierarchy thing, the sort of senior member of the family is allowed to look directly at you, but younger members aren't always allowed to look directly at them. So just find out, make sure that you do the right thing. And finally, relax, just show you're relaxed. Now, you don't need to be so relaxed that you look like you're going to go to sleep, because again, people will sense that. But relaxed, that you're not in a rush or in a hurry. Don't keep looking at your watch. If you're sitting at the table very tense, people might be worried that you've got other things that you have to do, or that you're concerned about other things. So it's really just that sort of relaxed to show people that you're at ease, so they can be at ease, and that they're being listened to as well. Okay. So for an example, to have a look at the example I put out here on the slide for you. If you're thinking about an elderly service user who's just moved into their own home and doesn't feel comfortable and has not yet got used to living with other people, you can imagine how difficult it might be having to communicate when, you know, they might be in the day room, or, you know, they're not used to having all these staff coming and going, sit and speak to them. So just, you know, using the SONA principles, sit down, make eye contact, make sure they're comfortable, make sure you don't have that power imbalance, lean slightly towards them, keep your body posture open, and, you know, nod and react physically to them so they feel listened to. Be aware if someone might be deaf, you might be needing to use sign language. A lot of people who've been deaf for years can lip read. Again, it's why it's important for you to have an open body language so that they can see your lips clearly, and also if you're sat in a reasonably, you know, so they can see the majority of the front of you as well. So you can keep your signing space clear, or if you're going to show visuals, and also your head above so they can see your facial features and they can see your lips. Why SOLA in care? Well, it really thinks about the key techniques that are really important to accompany active listening. You can't really do active listening without those additional sort of techniques. So EGAM was very helpful in coming out with that. Okay, so that's looking at 2 or 3 theories to meet 1.1 criteria. Okay, we're going to move on to 1.2 criteria now, which are types of communication that are utilised within health and social care practice. And one of the things we do know about the care field, there is a heck of a lot of communication, and it's really, you know, communication is just so important. 90% of the skill that you need is about communicating. And staff really need to be aware, you know, really get to know the individuals they're working with, and, you know, get to know, because each individual has their own way of sort of expressing themselves. And the more you get to know them, the better it is, really. So reminding us that effective communication is not just passing on information, it means making sure that somebody understands it. So reflecting back with people and checking is really important to know that they understand it. So the following types of communication we really do in health and social care is verbal, non-verbal, written and electronic. So thinking about verbal communication, we know this is really important and it's something that we do every day. We talk to our service users, interact day in, day out. We talk to our team members. It might just be in passing, or it might be formally in a meeting. But, you know, by the end of the day comes, you've been talking a lot, really. We will talk to other professionals on the phone if we're making appointments for the service user, or if we're trying to chase up reports or asking the doctor to come and see someone. And we might have group conversations, case conferences, care reviews. We might have multidisciplinary meetings with specialists who might be coming in to look at one person in particular. So there's lots of different levels of communication. We'll also be talking to family and carers, and we will have to sort of think about how we approach that. We'll speak to them differently from the way we talk to our colleagues, and sometimes the way we talk to the service user as well. So verbal communication, and you use it to obtain information from colleagues, to respond to questions from service users, to contribute to team meetings, to give feedback and to make your daily report, to provide support to colleagues, to provide support to the service users, parents and carers, and to deal with any problems and complaints that might arise. So it's used in all aspects. Non-verbal communication. We've already talked about SOLAR and how that backs up active listening. And we've also talked about how that body language is interpreted by the person you're talking to. So we do know that it's very hard to communicate with someone verbally without adding in that non-verbal. It's just sort of part of life, and it's part of the way people communicate. And it's, you know, it's really important when you're working with service users or with their family and carers and with other professionals that you're aware of your non-verbal communication. The way you manage your non-verbal communication with your best friends when you're interacting at home or when you're out for a pizza or something is very different maybe from your non-verbal communication when you're working with service users or working with maybe making reports to other professionals. So we're all quite conscious of that, really. So, you know, like I said, I wave my hands about quite a lot. I know that. And when I talk with my friends, they're on the go all the time. But if I was giving a report to other professionals, I'd probably control them a little bit. And again, when I'm talking with service users, I might control them a little bit because they could be distracting and confusing for service users. So I'm sort of very aware of how to use them in different situations. Sometimes it can be a positive thing to have backup non-verbal communication, but sometimes the service user might find it not such a good situation. So it can inhibit interaction. So if someone comes to a service user and they start to ask some questions and they don't sit down to their same level, but they stand up and speak down to them. They use quite a loud voice so that everybody in the room can hear them, and they use quite a sharp tone in their voice, and their body language is like, you know, either slightly aggressive or with their arms on their shoulders. Then the service user isn't going to want to communicate, and you know, they may refuse to communicate, or it may cause some sort of friction between them because they find the person aggressive and imposing and intimidating. They might even be frightened and might not want to talk. They might clam up completely. So people really need to be aware. So there's a lot of self-awareness required here as well. There's a little activity for you. There's a little YouTube link here. You can make a few notes on it. Just some of the various examples of non-verbal communication and the types of message they can convey. Okay, so have a look at that before you move on. Written communication. We do a lot of verbal communication in care, but we do an awful lot of written communication as well. And it's probably the most widely used form of communication. And it could include filling in forms, writing letters for appointments to the hospital, to the GP, to various specialists, reading reports and responding back to them, creating menus for people to make lunch options just on a day-to-day basis. All of these things, it's important to be accurate. The most important thing about written communication is that you do not make mistakes, okay? So it should never be done in a hurry. It should always be checked over beforehand. You need to make sure that your writing is legible. Nowadays, we manage to knock most things out on computer or a tablet or even your phone, which helps because it's much easier to read. When people used to write by hand years ago, you know, depending on who it was, your heart would sink when a certain doctor came in because you couldn't understand a thing they'd written. So it's legible, accurate and clear. It needs to be clear what you're saying and not ambiguous. So sentences need to be short and sharp and to the point, really. And this will prevent for people getting the wrong treatment, you know, and it could actually prevent a fatality. So really, really important. And this will include covers like procedures and policies, as I said, letters, reports, care plans, daily logs, all sorts really. So here's a little activity for you, especially again those of you who've done the level 3. We've looked at things like this before. See if you can make a note of 10 written documents that are used in a care service. There might not be something that you write, but documents that are written down. You should be able to come up with at least 10, and if you can't, you might need to do some research. Okay, so just to help you sort of expand your knowledge a little bit. Finally, we're going to look at electronic communication. We'll look at this in more detail in the unit because we've got some specific criteria about it, but I'm just introducing it now. Use of electronic communication, ICT, information and communication technology, really changed the way health and social care works. We can now access loads of information very, very quickly because of this. It makes it a lot easier for people to share information via text, email, or through the internet, or download information if you want it. So your manager can send you out a quick email asking you to come to a meeting. Personal details of all the service users can be recorded on a safe database, which can be with a password protect, which is good for data protection. A health centre can send information to a consultant for blood tests, and the results can come backwards and forwards to a hospital very, very quickly. When we used to send blood tests off, you could wait several weeks for some sort of letter or response would come out, but now it can be done by the test can be done and the GP could almost get it back within a few hours sometimes of receiving the test. Team meetings, you can now have team meetings on video conferencing if it's an important thing, but you've got people on night shifts or on days off, but who might want to be part of the meeting but don't really want to on their time off trek all the way into work and then all the way home. Then it's great because they can pop in on a video link, so you could do things like that which you could never do before. Lots of staff teams now have group WhatsApps where they just get information out really quickly if something's happened, or if they need people in, or if they need to make shift changes and things like that. It's been really, really effective because everyone can talk at the same time. So electronic communication, care plans, reports could all be done. As I said, they can be safely data protected. So it's become really useful. We will talk a bit more about it later on in the unit, about some of the pitfalls of it and some of the positives and negatives, but we'll deal with that later on. Finally, handover. For those of you who've done any placements in care work, you'll have had some experience of the handover process. Most teams communicate in quite a few different ways. One of the most important one is the handover. There will be 2 or 3 shifts usually, and it is that piece of communication that happens at the beginning and end of a shift, really. Usually takes place in the office to maintain confidentiality, and the purpose of it is to share people's progress against their care plan and the sort of things that have happened for them today and the sort of things you need the next shift to carry on for you. It will be generally a verbal report, but from the written notes, which will have been written up beforehand. There's a little YouTube clip here. It's a bit long, but it's worth watching. It shows shift handover between nurses in a hospital, and it shows a common practice, the way it often is, and then an example of best practice. And you can see with the common practice, you can see what some of the pitfalls are of it. So that's quite a good learning experience, especially for those of you if you haven't had any experience in a care home yet. Those of you who have had, you've probably already seen some of these common practice issues, and it just bears thinking about. It just gives you some ideas about how it can be done better. Okay, here's some references around the theories. That's the end of part 1 now. Okay, as I said, it covers the two criteria, 1.1 and 1.2. Okay, thank you for listening.